My beloved child. Stop what you are doing for just a moment, because something has been moving quietly beneath the surface, and you were never meant to pass this moment without hearing what is about to be revealed. There are times when a message arrives not because everything is already understood, but because something hidden has reached the point where it can no longer remain silent. This is one of those moments. Your heart may not know why it feels unusually alert, why certain memories have been returning without invitation, or why a name, a face, a feeling, or an unfinished conversation has been circling your thoughts. But there is a reason the atmosphere around your heart has felt different. Someone connected to your story has been trying to find the courage to reach toward you, and what has stopped them until now is beginning to lose its power. Pause here. Do not rush through these words as though they are ordinary. In this fictional message of divine reflection, imagine heaven drawing back a curtain, not to frighten you, not to make promises about another person's choices, but to reveal the emotional truth of a connection that has been carrying far more weight than you realized. The person your heart recognizes has been standing at the edge of a decision. They have opened a message and closed it. They have imagined your response before saying a single word. They have rehearsed sentences in their mind and deleted them before they could ever reach you. What looks like silence from the outside has not been empty. It has been crowded with questions, regret, hope, and one truth they can no longer comfortably avoid. Something happened inside them recently. Not a dramatic event that everyone could see, but a private shift. A moment when the distractions became quiet enough for them to finally hear their own heart. They may have spent weeks convincing themselves that they had more time, that the distance between you could remain unresolved a little longer, that you would somehow understand without explanation. But suddenly, the possibility of losing the chance to speak began to feel more painful than the fear of speaking itself. That realization changed something. It turned hesitation into urgency. It made them look at your connection differently. And now there is a sentence forming inside them that they have been afraid to admit even to themselves. They are not simply trying to contact you because they are lonely. That would be too simple. This reaches deeper. They are trying to understand whether the door between you is still open, because somewhere along the way they began to recognize that what they felt around you was different from what they have experienced elsewhere. You challenged something inside them without trying. Your presence forced them to notice the places where they were hiding from themselves. Your absence made them hear questions they could ignore when you were close. And the strange part is that the more they tried to create emotional distance, the more clearly they began to understand what that distance was revealing. There was a time when they believed silence would protect them. They thought if they said nothing, they could avoid making the wrong choice. They thought if they waited long enough, the intensity would settle into something easier to manage. But feelings that are never honestly examined do not simply disappear. They change shape. They appear in quiet nights, in unexpected memories, in songs heard at the wrong moment, in familiar places that suddenly feel different. They appear when another conversation reminds them of something you once said. They appear when someone else fails to understand them in the way you once did without needing a long explanation. Little by little, the silence they chose became the very thing forcing them to confront the truth. And here is where the story becomes more intense, because there is something they have not told you. They have been afraid that you may already be moving beyond them. They have imagined you becoming emotionally unavailable, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally learned to protect your peace. That thought has unsettled them more than they expected. They always believed they would know when the right time arrived. They believed there would be another day, another opening, another chance to explain themselves. But recently they have started wondering whether waiting for the perfect moment was simply another form of fear. This is why the urgency feels different now. It is not the urgency of danger. It is the urgency of truth reaching its limit. There comes a point when the heart becomes exhausted from carrying words that were meant to be spoken. There comes a point when pretending not to care requires more energy than simply admitting what is real. Your soulmate, within this story, has reached that threshold. They are no longer asking only, "What if I reach out and everything goes wrong?" A more powerful question has begun to replace it. What if I never reach out and spend years wondering what could have happened? That question has been following them. It follows them when everything becomes quiet. It follows them when they imagine the future. It follows them when they think about the version of themselves they want to become. And every time they attempt to dismiss it, your memory returns. But what they want to say is not what you might expect. They are not preparing some perfect speech filled with polished words. In fact, part of what has delayed them is the realization that there may be no beautiful way to explain everything. They know some of their choices may have confused you. They know there were moments when their behavior did not match their feelings. They know silence may have spoken louder than anything they intended. And they are beginning to understand that if they approach you now, they cannot approach you with half-truths. They will have to become honest about why they pulled away. They will have to admit what frightened them. They will have to acknowledge what they noticed after the distance grew. And most importantly, they may have to tell you about the moment when they realized you had become more important to them than they were prepared to accept. That moment did not happen when everything was easy. It happened when they thought they could live normally without your presence occupying so much emotional space. They tried to continue. They filled their schedule. They focused on other responsibilities. They told themselves they were being sensible. But somewhere inside that attempt to move forward, something unexpected happened. Instead of forgetting, they began comparing. Not comparing people in a shallow way, but comparing how they felt inside themselves. They noticed that conversations lacked a certain depth. They noticed that laughter did not always reach the same place. They noticed that being understood and being accompanied are not always the same thing. That discovery frightened them. Because once they recognized it, they could no longer claim the connection meant nothing. There is another layer they have been carrying, and this may be the part that changes how you understand their silence. They have been wondering whether you ever felt what they felt. They have replayed moments between you, searching for signs they may have ignored at the time. A look that lasted longer than expected. A conversation that became unexpectedly vulnerable. A goodbye that felt heavier than an ordinary goodbye should feel. A moment when neither of you said what was obvious because saying it would have changed everything. They remember more than you think. They remember details they never told you they noticed. They remember the tone of your voice when you were trying to hide disappointment. They remember when you showed kindness without expecting anything in return. They remember moments when you could have walked away emotionally, yet something in you remained gentle. And those memories are beginning to carry a different meaning now. The person who once believed they needed certainty before acting is realizing that certainty rarely arrives before courage. Sometimes courage must come first. Sometimes you speak while your hands are trembling. Sometimes you admit what matters without knowing what answer will come back. That is the lesson unfolding inside them. They are learning that love, connection, reconciliation, or even honest closure cannot be controlled like a perfect plan. They require vulnerability, and vulnerability has always been the place where this person struggles most. But there is something else. Something they have not yet decided how to explain. A conversation happened. It may have been with a close friend, a family member, or someone who knows them well enough to hear what they are not saying. At first, they tried to speak about you casually. They may have mentioned your name as if it were nothing unusual. But the person listening noticed the change in their expression. They noticed the pause. They noticed how quickly your soulmate defended certain memories of you. They noticed that the story carried emotion even when your soulmate was trying to sound unaffected. And then a question was asked. A simple question. But it landed harder than expected. If this person truly disappeared from your life tomorrow, would you be okay with never telling them how you really felt? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence became an answer of its own. Because in that moment, they saw the future differently. They imagined years passing. They imagined both of you living separate lives. They imagined accidentally hearing your name one day and realizing they had allowed fear to decide something their heart had never agreed to. And for the first time, the possibility of permanent silence became unbearable. That is when the idea of reaching you stopped feeling optional. Yet they still hesitated. Not because their feelings disappeared, but because another fear appeared. What if you no longer trust them? They know reaching out is not the same as repairing what was left unresolved. They know a message cannot erase confusion. They know words must eventually be supported by consistency. And strangely, this awareness is part of what makes the moment more sincere. They are beginning to understand that they cannot simply return expecting you to remain exactly where they left you. You have changed too. You have learned things. You have survived moments they may never fully understand. You have become more careful about where you place your emotional energy. And they sense that. They sense that the version of you they would meet now may not be the same version who once waited for clarity. This is why their next move matters. Because the message they are considering is not simply, "I miss you." That sentence feels too small. What they truly want to communicate is closer to this: "I finally understand what my silence may have cost us." But even that is not the deepest part. There is a confession beneath the confession. Stay with this moment, because this is where the story begins to turn. For a long time, they believed their greatest fear was rejection. But that was not completely true. Their greatest fear was being seen completely. They feared that if you saw how deeply you affected them, you would hold a kind of power they did not know how to surrender. They had learned to feel safe through emotional control. They could manage attraction. They could manage casual affection. They could manage connections that never required them to risk the hidden parts of themselves. But you were different. Around you, they felt something they could not neatly categorize. They felt understood and exposed at the same time. They felt comfort and fear together. They felt drawn toward you while simultaneously wanting to protect themselves from what that attraction might require. So they stepped backward. And perhaps you interpreted that distance as indifference. But in this story, the truth was almost the opposite. Sometimes people retreat not because nothing is there, but because too much is there and they have not yet developed the emotional courage to hold it. That does not excuse silence. It does not erase the effect their choices may have had on you. But it explains why their inner world became so complicated. And now, everything they avoided is returning at once. They are realizing that the heart cannot be managed forever through avoidance. Eventually the truth demands an answer. Your soulmate has begun asking themselves what kind of person they want to be when this chapter is remembered. Do they want to be the one who felt something meaningful but never risked honesty? Do they want to carry unanswered questions into every future relationship? Do they want fear to become the author of a story that courage might have changed? Those questions have brought them closer to you emotionally than any daydream ever could. Because this is no longer only about wanting you. It is about wanting to become someone capable of meeting you honestly. That is a very different desire. And this is where you must protect something precious inside yourself. Do not interpret this fictional spiritual message as a command to chase, wait, or abandon your boundaries. Your worth does not depend on whether another person sends a message tonight, tomorrow, or ever. The deeper invitation here is to remain open without becoming desperate, hopeful without becoming dependent, loving without abandoning discernment. If someone truly wants to return to your life, their words will matter, but their consistency will matter more. And strangely, your soulmate may already understand that. They know one conversation cannot repair everything. They know you may ask questions. They know you may need time. They know your heart is not something they are entitled to simply because they finally found courage. That realization has humbled them. There is tenderness forming where pride once lived. And it is changing the kind of message they want to send. They once imagined reaching you with confidence, perhaps pretending the distance had not affected them. But now the words forming inside them are quieter. More vulnerable. More human. They want to tell you that they thought about reaching out many times. They want to tell you that some nights they almost did. They want to admit that they were afraid you would see through every excuse. They want to explain that the distance taught them something proximity never could. And they want to ask a question they have been terrified to ask. But before that question can be revealed, there is another secret behind their sudden urgency. Something happened very recently that pushed them closer to action. It was small enough that nobody around them may have understood its significance. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of you. Perhaps they came across an old conversation. Perhaps someone unknowingly repeated a phrase you once used. Perhaps they visited a place connected to a memory. Whatever the trigger was, it cracked open something they had worked hard to keep contained. For a few moments, the past did not feel like the past. It felt present. And suddenly they remembered not just what happened between you, but who they were when they were with you. That is the part they cannot stop thinking about. Because sometimes what we miss most is not only another person. Sometimes we miss the version of ourselves that existed around them. The version that laughed more freely. The version that dreamed bigger. The version that felt seen without performing. The version that could imagine a future without needing every detail mapped first. Your soulmate remembered that version of themselves. And they realized they had not felt quite the same since. That realization brought emotion to the surface they had been successfully postponing. They asked themselves whether they had mistaken emotional safety for emotional isolation. They wondered whether protecting themselves had quietly become a prison. They wondered whether the wall they built to avoid pain had also blocked the very connection they had secretly wanted. And then your name returned again. Not as nostalgia. As possibility. That distinction matters. Nostalgia looks backward and says, "That was beautiful." Possibility looks forward and asks, "Could something still be built?" Your soulmate is standing between those two places right now. They do not know what you would choose. They do not know whether too much time has passed. They do not know whether your heart would recognize them the same way. But they know they are tired of pretending the question does not matter. And here is what heaven, within this cinematic story, would whisper to you. Do not confuse someone else's awakening with your responsibility. Their courage is theirs to find. Their message is theirs to send. Their truth is theirs to speak. You do not have to force a door open. You do not have to decode every silence. What belongs in your life should be able to approach you with respect, honesty, and clarity. Your task is different. Your task is to become quiet enough to know what you truly want if that message arrives. Because you may have spent so long wondering what they would say that you forgot to ask yourself what you would need to hear. Would you need an apology? Would you need explanation? Would you need consistency rather than promises? Would you need them to acknowledge how their absence affected you? Would you need time before responding? Would you simply need the truth? These questions matter, because something about your energy has shifted too. You are not standing where you once stood. You are no longer meant to accept confusion just because it arrives wrapped in emotion. You are allowed to listen without immediately deciding. You are allowed to care without surrendering your boundaries. You are allowed to feel deeply and still choose wisely. And perhaps that is why this connection could only reach this point now. Earlier, both of you may have been operating from fear in different ways. One feared vulnerability. The other feared loss. One pulled away. The other searched for meaning. One avoided speaking. The other listened too closely to silence. But growth changes the dynamic. When one person learns honesty and the other learns self-respect, a completely different conversation becomes possible. And that is the conversation trying to emerge. There is a reason the person reaching toward you feels more nervous than excited. They know the next words could change the direction of everything. They know once honesty enters the room, neither of you can return to pretending nothing was there. They know if you answer, the conversation may finally move into territory both of you avoided. And they know there is one subject they cannot avoid anymore. It involves a decision they made during the distance. A decision you may not know about. At the time, they believed it would help them move on, prove something to themselves, or create enough distraction to quiet their feelings. But instead, that decision revealed the opposite. It showed them exactly what they had been trying not to admit. They discovered that replacing a feeling is not the same as resolving it. They discovered that staying busy is not the same as healing. They discovered that pretending to be finished with a story does not automatically close the emotional chapter. And eventually they reached a point where even they could no longer believe their own explanations. That is when the truth became unavoidable. They still wanted to talk to you. Not to recreate the past exactly as it was. Not to pretend nothing happened.